Hello everyone, this is AlezierChess here to help you to realize your potential. And today we're going to be looking at a game I played against a 24-17 in the Alekhine's defense with, according to the engine here, 98% accuracy versus 91% accuracy. And you won't believe it, guys, but I missed a mate in one, but I still had an overwhelming position and went on to crush my opponent. So let's take a look at this. I played e4. He played knight f6, the Alekhine's defense. I played pawn to e5, chasing the knight. And after knight d5, d4, d6, c4, knight b6, e takes, e takes. We have one of the standard positions in Alekhine's defense. Here it's also possible to play c takes d6 and get a sort of dragon formation on the king side with g6 and bishop g7. But in the game, my opponent played e takes, and I played knight to f3 right away. Now, we're going to go over a bunch of lines here at the end of the video. It is possible for black to pin the knight in this line with bishop g4, and after h3, bishop takes, queen takes. Then black gets a playable but somewhat worse game. But here after g6, I decided to play h3 just to restrict the bishop. And after bishop g7, bishop to d3, he has no good place to put this light square bishop, because now if he puts it on f5, I'm going to damage his king side. So he plays castles, and I castle because he's ready to bring the rook into the center. Now after knight to c6, with a double attack on my d4 pawn, I play bishop to e3 to guard the pawn, and he plays rook to e8. I developed my last minor piece with knight to c3, and here he played pawn to h6, which is a terrible weakening of his position. Like, this move makes his position so much worse. What he's supposed to do here is play pawn to d5, and after c5, knight c4, bishop takes, pawn takes, d5. He's supposed to not move this knight to b4, but instead play bishop takes knight, and after pawn takes, the game will continue. For example, knight e5 takes, d6, takes, rook e6 going after the passed pawn, bishop to f4, and let's say bishop d7, rook b1, queen to f6, hitting the bishop and the pawn on c3. There's now queen d2, protecting both, and after bishop to c6, protecting b7. This position is 0.5. We're going to take a look at everything else at the end of the video. But to get back to the game, he had no business pushing his pawn to h6. In the Alekhine's defense, you need to play d5 so that you don't get suffocated and so you have a square for your b6 knight. Because if white takes, he goes into an isolani or isolated queen pawn position. That's not that great for him. And then there's going to be the knight on c6, bishop on g7, and queen on d8, converging against the pawn on d4. And also, in some cases in the Alekhines, if this bishop was able to get out from c8, then after c5, you could play knight c8 to e7 to f5, so that you would have this knight on b6. Like, this knight would be over here, and you would have the two knights and the bishop hitting the pawn on d4. Potentially the queen could come to f6 as well to aid in your conquest of the d4 pawn and square. But since he didn't play d5, but instead played h6, this runs into queen to d2, threatening to just get in at the king side right away. And now queen to f6 was played, which compounds the error. Instead, the computer wants bishop to f5, and you can see here that I can simply take it, again damaging his formation, but he can't take back right away. He would need to play knight takes c4, And here, moves like queen to d3. The game continues after knight takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, and I can bring the rook to e1. The computer also likes bringing the rook to d1, but rook ae1 seems natural. And here he can try to simply offload the weakened pawn in order to be able to get into the position with queen d7. And this position is a bit better for white, but it's nothing to write home about. The problem here is that it looks terrible optically to shatter your structure, and he obviously missed the intermezzo knight takes c4. So instead, he played queen to f6, which basically loses on the spot. The computer here likes b3, likes knight to b5, but also here, pawn to d5 is just fine. Here, knight to d8, he's just never going to be able to coordinate because this knight is stuck. Like here, after bishop to d4, for example, a sample line goes queen e7, you attack the queen and the rook, queen stays guarding, trade the bishop, trade the rook, bring the knight into play with a fork threat on c7, and then put the king in check, put the rook in the middle. Now we're threatening queen f6 and rook e7, and knight takes c7 ideas. We're also threatening ideas of bishop takes g6 in some cases, like in order to open up the 7th rank. So after queen f6, bishop takes g6, f takes, rook e7 wins the queen. There's too many ideas here. This king is too exposed after losing his dark square defender and the bishop. So there's these ideas in the position after knight to d8, and there's also after d5, knight b4, with the idea of simply bishop e2 retreating to keep that bishop on the board. And if a move like a5, rook ae1, rook takes bishop, and white is one pawn's worth better after f takes e. But here, this is still a playable position somewhat for black, even though it looks very bad. At least he has the dark squared bishop, and I've had to weaken my king position somewhat. But instead of that, also, if you were to play knight a5, there's bishop takes this knight due to the double attack on c4. You have to ruin your formation. And then after rook c1, the threat is pawn to b4, winning a piece. So this is pretty bad for black as well. And also here, if knight b8, well here, this is just going back to the starting square. Like you're not going to have that much time here to be able to do something like that. It's obviously just terrible. I'm not even going to bother analyzing it. So after knight to e5, which was the move played in the game, we have knight takes. And here, if he plays queen takes, I have bishop takes knight gaining a tempo. And after pawn takes, then there's rook a to e1, skewering the queen and the rook. This bishop on c8 never moved, so the rooks never got connected. Black would be forced to drop material here. So also, there's pawn takes knight, and after c5, knight d7, knight b5, going after the fork on c7. There's ideas of queen d8, d6, rook to f8, knight takes c7, and after this, black is just simply lost. There's also instead, if e4, pawn takes, hitting the queen, queen e7, hitting c5, bishop e2, and if knight takes c5, there's knight d6, creating interference, hitting the rook. After knight e6 to go after c7, black loses an exchange. You can protect your passer, and in a sample line, say bishop to e5, queen a5 hitting the bishop, and protecting the pawn. So this way, if black takes, you can sack the rook for 2 minor pieces and be completely winning. A sample goes knight f4, takes, rook fd1, threatening rook to d8, winning the queen. If bishop d7, there's bishop g4, so that if bishop takes, there's again rook to d8, winning the queen. And if f5, queen d5 check, bishop interposes, queen takes b7, and if bishop takes rook, we can sacrifice our queen to get into the back rank so that when the queen takes, we have rook d8 check, winning the queen and creating a promotion, completely winning. So in the game, my opponent played rook takes, and after bishop d4, picking up an exchange, he blundered with queen to g5. Here it would have been better for him to attempt queen h4, but after taking, and f4, this position is winning for white, but it requires delicate handling because after bishop takes knight, it's just winning, but this is what the computer recommends. My worry would be if bishop d4 check, king to d2 must be played because king to h1, there might be ideas of bishop takes h3, but after takes, queen takes, I can block with the queen on h2. Like, just to show you guys that takes, queen h2, but this loses the bishop, and here black is better. So I don't know why the computer would want to just dump off the bishop when that's just not a realistic way to try to gain counterplay. So king h2 would have to be played, and yes, white is still winning, but you should at least make white prove it by inserting the check, in my opinion. After bishop to d7, rook centralizes to the open foul before black gets there. And after something like a5, because the computer can't think of a move and neither can I, you can go for f5 and something like g5 to try to prevent opening the position near the king. Runs into g3. The queen is almost trapped. If queen h5, bishop to e2, g4, the bishop's going to take and the queen's going to be forced to trade on g5. Or instead of g4 after bishop e2, there's bishop takes knight, queen takes bishop, and after g4, bishop takes. White is up king safety, he's up material, and he's up position on black. Black has nothing here. And as you can see from the eval, it's plus 4.7. So now, to get back to the game continuation, he played queen g5, which runs into f4, and after queen h4, he's thinking if I take the rook with the pawn, he's going to take my bishop with check, but he missed the intermezzo bishop to f2, counterattacking his queen, and now with the queen and the rook hanging, this position is super busted. So after queen e7, pawn takes, rook ad1, getting ready to run my potential passed pawn down the board, f5, c5, hitting the knight, knight d7, d6. Now the idea is that after takes, you cannot play queen takes, do the bishop c4 check, and you lose the girl. So instead, after queen d8, we have bishop c4 check anyway, king h7, knight b5, knight to f6, knight c7, rook b8, bishop takes on a7, bishop d7, you take the rook. After the recapture, knight e6, going after the dark squared bishop, knight e4, counterattacking my queen, queen e3, to guard any check on this diagonal so there's no funny business. And now after bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, bishop to f6, going to try to reroute, d7. Now here he has to guard this d8 square constantly so I don't promote. So after queen to c7, rook c1, queen d6, Rook fd1. I don't care about my bishop anymore. He did his job. After takes, promote, takes, takes. Here he has no checks. And after g5, trying to create an escape hatch for his king, I played queen to b3. So this way the queens would trade. I also wanted to stay in touch with b6. So this way he doesn't pop my rook on d8. So here he played queen to e7, which is a blunder. And I missed mate and won. I had queen to g8 here. But I didn't see it. I covered my rook, threatening to bring rook 1 to d7, winning his queen. So he tried to run away. And I went for the trade of queens here, with queen g8 check, queen e8 check, and wrapped up this game quite nicely in a few moves. Like, the rest doesn't really need any commentary. I cut his king off, the a-pawn's going to promote, and he'll be mated shortly. Now, as you can see, it's at 98% accuracy by the engine. But let's go back and get a look at this opening variation in more detail. Because after knight to f3, it's possible to play bishop to g4 here. I didn't want to play h3 right away in this particular line, which I love doing if you've seen my Maroczy bind video, for example, because the e-file is open. I didn't want him getting castled before me and trying to bring any pieces there. It's because I haven't studied this variation in that much detail, actually, but I've been playing very well against the Alekhine for a few months now. I watched a lot of Olexandr Bortnyk's videos on it, so I know if black doesn't get in his d5 on time, he's pretty much just busted. Otherwise, he equalizes or gets close to equality, as you can see from the earlier analysis. But after bishop g4, h3, bishop takes knight, queen takes, g6 is playable here. But actually, it's really not playable because of queen takes b7. And white is pretty much winning out of the gate. And that's one of the differences where it's acceptable to play knight to f3 and allow black to give you his light squared bishop, because here it backfires. So here he has to go for queen to e7 check, and after bishop to e3, because here bishop to e2, the pawn on c4 will be hanging in some cases, maybe not right away because you still don't want queen takes b7 and then your rook on a8 is hanging, but bishop to e3 just covers with no funny business. You don't have to think about it. Knight c6 comes. Now the pawn on d4 is a victim to the same type of idea potentially, but you can play knight c3, and again, like, you don't have to care, because if knight takes d4 here, we have queen takes b7, and after knight c2 check, king d2. If we give up our rook, we now have knight to d5. And the problem here is, if knight takes, we take the rook first, right? And then we can get in the intermezzos. Then we can take, put the king on a bad square, take this knight, and then next move we're going to bring out a right squared bishop with a check, and we're going to pop the knight on a1. Therefore, you're going to wind up being a piece up. So here, you don't have to worry about this knight takes d4 business. It's actually a nice trap for white. So here, if black plays g6 now, we have bishop to e2, breaking the pin. So now knight takes d4 just straight up hangs a piece, because there's no pin on the king anymore. And after bishop to g7, pawn to c5 is playable. And after c5, there's no knight takes d4 because of bishop takes knight. And on the recapture, this knight on b6 hangs. Also, after bishop takes, then this knight hangs. So instead, on c5, we have d takes c5, d takes c5, and after bishop takes knight, pawn takes, knight to d7. Here white has rook to b1. And white is 1 pawn's worth better, according to the engine here. You have the bishop pair, you can castle, you have king safety, and these open lines are going to work against black in the long term, especially the weakness of the dark squares. And here, there's actually a very funny idea that if black castles queenside, you have queen takes c6, and if the queen is captured, you have bishop a6 mate. So how did you guys like the game, and how did you guys like the analysis? Like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know what I can do to improve the channel. Let me know what you guys think of the game and think of my analysis. Also, if you have any analysis of your own that can help to edify myself and others who watch the video, or look at the comment section, please post it down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to run through this game one more time quickly. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Improve every day, guys. Study hard. You guys can get there. If you're not at my level or the next person's level, don't worry about it. Just do better. I'm trying to get up to 2700 one day. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Peace.